Hey folks, Mike Monday here, and I'm here again with Luke Sipka, one of the Make Music Your Life coaches, but also a client, a long-term client of mine. And in the last coaching session we recorded, we went into that coaching session wanting to talk about his mixing process, the end of his music making process, because the automatic music machine can be, it is applicable to kind of every part of the process. It's not just about starting music, it's about finishing music as well. And funnily enough, in that coaching call, we didn't actually end up talking about the mixing process because there was a higher level bunch of decisions that needed to be made, that Luke needed to make, that weren't being made. And this is one of the interesting things about coaching people over the last decade or so, that I've noticed in the majority of cases, the biggest obstacle, the biggest problem to them actually doing what they want to do isn't the one that they think it is. It's something else entirely. And that needs to be dealt with first before they can really focus on the obstacle as they had narrated it to themselves up until that point. So, so Luke, hello, Luke.
Hello, Mike. How you doing?
So first of all, let's find out how things have gone since, it was about a week ago, wasn't it, that we did the coaching call? So
Maybe 2 weeks?
maybe 2 weeks, yeah. God, time flies. How have things gone since we clarified the decisions that you need to make about the music that you're actually going to end up mixing?
Oh, it's great. It's like I have a lot more, it's almost like there's more space in my thinking because there's not like 100 different vague options. It's like it's either this or this, and it's just very clear throughout the whole process. And it's made it a lot easier to think about the music and determine which music I want to work on.
Right. So because what ended up happening in that coaching call, and I'll put a link to that previous coaching call in the description beneath this video. So if you want to check that out, click the link there after this one. But essentially, it was a bunch of unmade decisions about what this music was going to be, and also that meant that for now you were putting aside some of the things that you thought you might want to work on. And as a result, you ended up increasing a goal that you'd set for yourself, which I think was 6 tracks by the end of September or start of September or something. You doubled it to 12. Right. So simply by being clear about what decisions need to be made and when, you increased the potential productivity and of your machine, if you like. So we didn't get to actually talking about the specific mixing process, but today that's what we're here to do right now. So let's start just by finding out, how do you mix your music at the moment? Maybe go from what state the music is in before it goes into a mixing process, because I know some people mix as they go along and everything, but just let us know how you get to that point, not from the very beginning, but just towards the end, and then what that mixing process entails.
Yeah, so I do some, I think it's impossible to not do any mixing as you go along. I'm definitely like doing that. But then I found that if I, get done with the track and then, save it, what I do is I take off all the effects, unless there's something that's a very clear, part of the sound. And then I'll turn off all the reverbs, I'll turn down all the volumes. And then I'll find some reference tracks that are in the style of the track I'm working on. I'll use this plugin called Sample Magic AB. I'll get those tracks in. I'll volume match them. And then I'll start typically with just bringing up the kick drum and trying to get it to match with the reference tracks. Then I'll go through and I'll do only volume mixing. So I just get the levels right first. Mm-hmm. And I'm listening to the reference tracks, coming back to the regular track. And basically once I have the volume sitting okay, it's not necessarily perfect, I'll go on and I'll do any sort of like compression that I may be doing. And I don't do much compression, but occasionally I will. But I do that. And then let's see what happens after that. Then I'll go on to like EQ, and I'll only be using EQ at this point. And basically what I'll be doing is taking an EQ plugin and just, boosting things, cutting things, and just kind of like scrolling through the frequencies and just listening to kind of like what happens when I do different things with the frequencies. And I'll go through and I'll do that with like all the tracks, and just kind of, sometimes nothing needs to be done with them. And sometimes I don't put EQ on everything. But then after that, I'll go through and do any sort of like distortion, whether that be like saturators or like tape emulators or preamps, just anything to kind of like fatten up the sounds. Then I'll do another round of EQing and like experimenting if I hear anything that's like clashing. Then I'll typically, what do I do after that? And this whole time I've had it in mono. Then I'll take it out of mono at that point and do any sort of like chorus or like flanger, but I don't even do that often because that's typically already in there. And then I will do any panning. And then after all that's done and it's sitting well, like to me, and I think it's balanced, and I've, listened to some reference tracks, I'll start throwing on reverb and delay, and kind of just like getting the space going. And I think that's kind of like the basic roadmap.
Cool.
And then if there's any like automation or anything like that, I'll do that at that point too.
All right. So first of all, can I just ask, so where did this mixing process come from?
I think it came from, I think a while ago I read a book that had something similar, and then I watched, I think it was that bass clef guy had a course. I think I watched that, and he had something similar. And then I just mixed a bunch of tracks and kind of started to hammer out like my own sort of version of this.
Okay. So, so you start with a reference track, yeah, and you get the volumes balanced between A and B, yeah. So your track and the reference track, yeah.
And I get all the reference tracks to be at the same loudness.
Okay, so you've got multiple reference tracks.
I'll typically have like 3.
Okay. And how do you choose those reference tracks?
I tend to have some that are just, I've listened to them a lot and I know kind of like in my head what their sort of arrangement and mix is. And then I'll usually pick one that is in like a similar style to what I'm mixing.
So then you choose one. Oh no, so you keep with the 3.
Well, sometimes it kind of depends. It's like there's a few that because I'm like working in like a similar style I use, but then if the style is a little bit different, like let's say I'm typically making like, I don't know, like 100 BPM like bonobo trip hop stuff, and then I am working on like a house track, I'll bring in a house track so I can kind of hear like the kick and the snare and how that typically works. Does that make sense?
Okay, so I'm not going to go too far into this because like the whole debate about reference tracks or no reference tracks is an ongoing one, and I don't think there's a right answer. It depends on what you want to do. But from my perspective, I don't use reference tracks that early in my process. I use them at the end, to check things. And there's a number of different reasons for that, which I think are a good idea. One is that reference tracks, they're at a different point in the process, so they're finished, and at this point it kind of and also they're mastered as well. So there's that too, and also it's very hard to find something that is actually completely relevant. And the other thing is that I'm actually looking in my mixing process to actually identify my sound rather than I mean it needs to match. It needs not to be out of sort of it needs not to be on Mars, so that when someone plays it, it just sounds completely weird. Yeah. But I can do that at the end with various things. And it's like the way the parts interact with each other are dependent on the parts. And to me, anyway, and this is totally debatable and I totally get it, but to me, using a reference track at that point doesn't make sense. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned bass clef, because bass clef is a club DJ.
Yeah.
Yep. And so he has he has to kind of match in a very specific way. And I'm not sure your music is club music, so I'm not sure. It's probably more important to do that referring in a club setting, although to be fair, I didn't when I was making club music. So
yeah,
but, yeah.
I'm not going for like 100% or even like 60. I'm going for like very like listen for like 3 seconds and make sure that it's not on Mars. I'm not going to get it like close.
Okay, cool.
I'm just like calibrating my ears, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think so calibrating your ears is absolutely that's cool. You could do that. I mean, that's what I often do before I start a session, and I'm taking a pee or something. I'll just put on some music. I'll put on a bit of floating points or something, and that's enough. But actually putting it in an A/B thing at that point, I don't know. That's something to question. And again, a lot of people are going to disagree with me about this. I totally get that, and this is one of those, But I think there are trade-offs in both ways of doing it. But I tend to use reference tracks at the end just to make sure that I've not messed something up. So anyway, so you get the reference tracks, and then the next step you said is you go through and you do the volume.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's call it level.
Just the levels. Yeah.
Yeah. Levels, not volume is not accurate, right? So just step one, and you said that you determine the levels based upon the reference tracks.
Kind of. I try to get like depending on the genre again, I'll try to get like the kick even with the reference tracks kick. And then after that, then it's like totally dependent on the track itself and what, like, do I want the bass line to be the thing? Like, what is the thing? And do I want the thing to be in the front or do I want it to be in the back? And where is the thing sitting?
Right.
It's kind of like, it's dependent, I think, on every track.
Yeah. Okay. So you go through and you do all the levels. Then you do what?
Compression. And if I'm doing compression.
Yeah. So in other words, this levels thing is like getting a general balance between the parts. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then compression, if needed, and then what?
Then I'll do EQing.
Again, if needed. So do you go through all of your tracks and try?
No, I'm taking a very discover mindset with it, where I'll kind of get like an idea that something's going on in one of these, and then I'll go and I'll basically just like gain it up and just kind of scroll through and see what happens, and then turn off the EQ, and then turn on the EQ, and then just kind of like bring it down. And so I don't even really know.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you're EQing, are you EQing things in context with other things, or are you doing them are you soloing them?
Oh no, I'm not soloing them. I'm listening to the whole mix and just listening and boosting and listening and kind of just getting a feel for what's going on. And then if something jumps out and everything gets clearer. Um, it's really hard to explain. It's like something will just like pop out, and I'm like, oh, that, and then I'll kind of just like tweak it and then move on.
Okay.
If that makes
Then what was the next step?
distortion.
Well, let's call it saturation because I think that's more of a catch-all term, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, kind of distortion is encompassed by saturation. It's a kind of heavier form of saturation, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you do that?
That's a case by case basis because sometimes it doesn't need it, and sometimes yeah, they're all if needed.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll just be like, I wonder if the drums would sound like, just for an example, like I wonder if the drums would sound a little bit better with or a little bit bigger with some saturation. So I'll add on, like, I don't know, a Camel Crusher, and then typically what I'll do is I'll have a gain. So I'll put it on, and then I'll try to gain it down to get it so that it's the same level before the distortion was added, or the saturation. And then I'll group that and I'll turn it on and off and just A/B it and be like, okay, at the same level, is this saturation actually adding something to this? Or is it just
Making it worse?
Yeah, like, is it making it worse? But yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Then you said effects, didn't you?
Yeah. So like chorus, flanger, phaser, not often.
And what about like delay and reverb? Or is chorus, flanger, phaser come before that?
That
Or
comes
is
before.
okay? So chorus. So we're talking essentially chorus type effects first.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is it always the same? Is this process always the same?
Oh no, I mean, this is like a rough roadmap that, I mean, I'll be EQing during the saturation, and and I'll do another round of EQ after the saturation. That's what I forgot to say.
Oh man, you're messing up my numbers, Luke.
No.
All right. Okay. Right. So is that a fair reflection of what you just said?
And panning I typically do after the chorus type effects, before the reverb and delay. And I take it out of mono at that point.
Okay, yes, okay. So hang on a minute. So we've got to include that.
So I take the mono out after the EQ,
Yeah.
the second EQ.
Oops. There we go. Turn on stereo. Panning. I didn't say chorus type effects. But yeah, so we're talking about chorus, phase, and flange. Oops. So, first thing to say is I am not a mixing engineer. Yeah, and there are 5,000. Yeah, there are 5,000 different ways to mix, and different processes, and different. Everyone loves the word workflow, don't they? So workflows, yeah, to mixing, yeah, so when I'm talking about this stuff, I don't have an axe to grind about anything in particular. Just similar with the reference tracks, because there are trade-offs with every single way that you do anything, and really, what this needs to be, the way of thinking about your music making, is that it is actually a method through which you are going to define your way of doing it. Yeah, not you're not looking for every possible way of doing it so that you can follow this one guy and do it the way that he does it.
Right.
Yeah, or this one girl or whatever. It's just that there are, and I mean the other thing is this is kind of fractal in a sense, is that one approach is going to work better in a certain situation than another approach, because all your music isn't going to be the same. And actually, if you are doing, because we talked in the last coaching session about different projects that you're doing, and your process is going to want to be different for a different project depending on what you're doing.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. And to me, like the first bit of feedback I have about this is this looks like a process that you got from someone else. I mean, yes, you've adapted it, but it looks to me like there's this sort of like, I do this, then I do this, then I do this, then I do this, because yeah.
And I guess I want to say, like, like after step 4, like step 5 through 9 is kind of like crazy town. Like just,
it kind of goes, yeah.
It's not like, it's very loose.
Yes.
What I'm doing.
So there's a few things about this I'm questioning, in terms of the actual process itself. And again, I understand there are upsides and downsides to doing it every single way, and I'm not here to grind an axe, but I'm just thinking about the upsides and the downsides. So starting your mix in mono, I totally get that, and I do mix things in mono. We're going to start by talking about the order in which you're doing things. What is the upside of starting your mix in mono?
I think it's that you don't have the, if you have stuff that's stereo and it's standing out, because let's say it's on the right or the left, you're kind of getting all the frequencies together, and a lot of people are going to hear it in mono. So if it sounds good in mono, the theory is that it will sound even better in stereo. Right? That's kind of like
and a lot of music. I mean, a lot of the music, classic music that we love, was in mono. And we hear a lot of music in mono. Yeah. So that's the upside to it. And there's definitely an upside there. What's the downside to starting your mix in mono? What are the downsides?
Well, it doesn't sound as good, and it's not what the music actually is. So
that's an interesting question. Let's go into this. That's like whoa. We could talk about that for hours. So let's not go there. Let's not go there. But
I said it, and I was like, oh,
what actually is the music? Okay. So could you think of any other downsides?
It might not sound like that in stereo. Like there might be some things that are happening that aren't happening.
So let me ask you a question. What is the purpose of a mix down? What are you actually doing when you're mixing a piece of music?
I would say trying to make everything. Well, it's to make everything. Make things hearable. If you it kind of depends on like the track itself, because in some contexts it would be like to make the vocal more clear, and if you're making like some heavy rock song, it would be to make that like wall of sound. It's basically to determine where. I mean, I think of mixing like a 3D space. Have you ever seen those like diagrams?
Yeah.
Where it's like the 3D room. I'm just trying to place the sounds within the 3D room when I'm mixing.
Okay. Bingo. So what is the downside to starting your mix in mono if that is what you're doing when mixing?
You're not actually placing it in a 3D room.
Right. Because you're like I think one of the fundamental purposes of a mix is, I mean, it's like the way I think about it is that you're presenting music in its best possible light, i.e., you're presenting music in a particular place. You're putting people into a place, a physical
Right.
space, or
Mhm.
I mean, it can be in a fantasy physical space. In fact, that's what I like to do. That's my that's the way I kind of mix is I try to think about some kind of magical, fantastical place that doesn't exist. Yeah, that's
Right.
how I kind of think about it.
I,
And by
I do that.
yeah, and by starting your mix in mono, I'm not saying don't mix in mono because I do mix in mono. By starting your mix in mono, it's almost like you're not doing the thing that is one of the things, if you like, in my opinion. So that's something to think about. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing I'm questioning. So the first thing that we're kind of really focusing on here is the order in which you're doing things. Um, the other thing to question, again, I'm not telling you to not start your mix in mono because I'm sure there will be a lot of amazing mix engineers who would say that's the best advice that you could ever give anyone to start your mix in mono. Yeah, but I'm just asking you to question these things for yourself because
Right.
I would never start a mix in mono, but that's because that's what I choose to do because of the way I think about mixing.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm not giving you the solution. I'm helping you find your own solution. So the other question I have is about the order here. So what is the purpose of compression, EQ, and saturation, stroke distortion?
I would say compression. Compression has a few. Um, it can
Yeah, I
be
should have said
to,
what are the purposes. Sorry.
yeah, I mean, compression, like if you're using it on like a drum set, it can kind of be to like make the whole thing sound like, squash the dynamics and make the quiet thing sound louder. Um,
So bring up, essentially level the dynamics somewhat. So make the soft things louder and the loud things softer. So that's one of the purposes of compression.
mhm.
What else?
If you wanted to like glue together, or like bring together different synths or different drum sounds to make them sound more like they're coming from like the same thing and they're like the same unit. Um,
Yeah. So to glue things together. Sometimes you get those mixes which are really nicely separated, but it's just like nothing is related to anything else. So you can glue things
right.
together using compression. What else do we use compression for?
Um,
I mean, and
if
also the opposite way around. You can use compression to separate things too. But yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
make things more punchy.
uh-huh.
Make things like if you have a vocal that's when you're singing, like you'll do something really loud and then like really soft, so it's, I guess it's kind of the same
Same
thing.
thing. That's dynamic leveling. Yeah. So if you think
uh,
about what compression does to the transients, which is the start of a note of any kind, yeah, the very start, yeah, which is one of the ways in which we kind of process sound is by like sort of hearing the transient, and the transients can be very, or they can be, like that.
mhm.
Um, so if you think about what that does to our perception, so it's the transients and also what it does to the release of the sound. What is that doing?
What can change like the how sharp or soft the transient is.
Yep. And
Um,
what does that do?
it can make it like it can make it sound cut through easier because it
So
like it's
so so usually if you like make a transient jump out by increasing the attack, it brings it forward.
right.
Yeah.
So it makes
And
it closer to you.
yeah, and if you kind of smudge the transient or smear the transient, it will push it back. So again, it's a spatial thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so let me just ask you the same question about EQ and saturation.
The EQ, I guess, is kind of like, there's what I've found is I'm basically listening for where things may be like overlapping, where things may be like clashing, or there's some like, I don't know, it's almost like I hear it in my ear and it's just kind of like very unpleasant. Um, and
So
then
kind of
it's,
reducing, so actually bringing down the level of certain unpleasant frequencies.
yeah, bringing down certain unpleasant frequencies and finding little spaces
So
of,
okay, so we've got dynamic leveling, finding little spaces, yeah, between parts, so separation. What else?
um, I mean, kind of just making the sound, you kind of like designing the sound, like if it's kind of like dull and you want it to be more upfront and you increase like the higher frequencies, it can kind of bring it forward.
Okay, so
um,
spatial stuff, so bringing things forward,
um, and also like taking things back.
taking things back. So we've got the spatial thing. What about saturation? I mean, there are other things
I
separate. So there's
typically,
separation, and there's bringing things together as well in EQ. So what about saturation?
I typically think of that as like, you're adding harmonics, so you're kind of you're changing the size of the things in the room.
So
um,
and what's the purpose of doing that?
to fill the room.
So
um,
to bring them forward, maybe.
Yeah, bring them forward, and like if you have like your full frequency band, maybe like increase the frequencies in certain areas.
Okay,
Um,
so there's some kind of like leveling of various different frequencies going on there. So you're bringing up certain frequencies. Are you
and then
noticing something? Yeah, go on. Yeah.
also just like, I don't know, if you put on a tape plugin, it just makes the thing sound more buttery.
Yeah,
um,
it's a little, it's a little bit. It's not. I mean, it is kind of compressing the signal, but it's again, it's smudging the transits. Are you noticing something about what we've just said? What the purposes of compression, EQ, and saturation are? Are you noticing something here?
they're all kind of the same.
Yeah. So they're all doing this. I mean, they are different things. I'm not saying they're the same thing, but actually, compression. You can use a compressor like an EQ. You can
Mhm.
use a I mean, saturation is really a form of compression, really. Um, and and you can use an EQ like a compressor, because if you take down certain like frequency ranges with an EQ, which are jumping out, essentially what you're doing is you're compressing the signal,
Right.
because I mean, there's a certain, I was doing something with it's an orchestra thing, and there's this basses bowing a thing, and it goes like that, and I just find that particular frequency and take it down, and then you can actually see, if you were to put it through it, that it doesn't have, so I've essentially compress the signal without. It's a different process, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
compression, EQ, and saturation are like different methods for, and they do have, I'm not saying they are the same thing, but they do similar things. So with that in mind, what might be the downside? And again, I'm not saying that this is right. I'm just saying just something to bear in mind. What might be the downside of the order that you have stated there?
um, you might it might saturation might be better suited first, and you might end up compressing it first.
Yeah, I mean, the downside to, I mean, I mean, well, let's talk about the upside. What's the upside to doing it in this order? Compression, EQ, then saturation.
um,
Or what are the
well,
upsides? There are probably many.
one is that it just separates in my brain what I'm doing.
Simpler, yeah.
But even then, like half the time, by the time I'm at EQ, I've already saturated. Because it's really kind of like a loose map that once
Yeah.
I hit the flow, it's
Mm.
like, you know, who even knows what words are? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, no, I know. I get that. I mean, I think one of the purposes of this is just to get you clear on how you're thinking about what you're doing, so that we can come to We can say, okay, so maybe around here there's something that can be done because these three, in fact, I mean, even these down here as well, chorus and reverb and delay. Again, for me, I'm thinking about creating a vibe. Another way of putting vibe is a space,
Yeah,
and these, I mean, this as well. Yeah,
that's how you do that for
yeah.
sure.
These don't do the same things as these. Yeah, but it is all part of creating a space. I mean, at times you're sorting out problems, but other times, I mean, really, I'm attempting to create a 3D or even 4D, and we'll get onto that, a 4D space. Yeah, the fourth dimension being time,
Right.
right? And doing these in order like this, it it just makes me wonder whether that it kind of doesn't make sense to me in a sense. It's like I don't know how. I mean, put it this way, I don't know how I would do that.
Right. And what's happening is really that it sounds really bad until about step 10. and and I've had people in the room kind of like antsy almost like, what are you doing? Like this does not sound good. And I'm just like, hold the line, hold the line.
Yeah, but
Um,
I mean, I think, but it doesn't have to sound good or bad. But I mean, but the thing is, and again, I'm not saying that you have to do everything with all of these things, but having that clear delineation of I do this, then I do that, and then I do this, then I do that for every single mix that you do for every single piece of music might be unnecessary and even kind of holding you back in some way. So let's just talk about it in relation to the machine. So essentially, you've got it, and this is my machine, not yours. Um, so you've got the things that have gone into done, yeah.
mhm.
And essentially, what state are they in when they're in done? So what do they
uh,
sound like at that point?
there, I mean, because like I said, I'm mixing as I go along. And sometimes I'll do the whole mix process and be like, this doesn't sound as good as the the going along mix,
Mm.
um, which happens. Um, and so typically, I mean, they could almost be released as they are
Okay.
at that stage, typically.
So essentially, what you're doing is you're zeroing everything so that there's nothing on anything before you start
Yeah, I'm
mixing.
I'm basically like the reason I and I mean maybe this is wrong. Like my thinking was that because I'm very when I'm going like I'll throw on all the reverb, and sometimes like kind of get a little over the top with effects, and so I like that while I'm writing to be able to do that. So I basically was like, how can I um, do that and then be able to come back and kind of like I'm basically just dividing. How do I explain this? I'm trying to be able to come back as almost like a cleanup crew and redo the mix as though I was an artist and then a mix engineer came in and got the
Mm.
track.
Yeah. Um, so that may well be what a mix engineer would do, but the thing is, that's not the situation you are in.
Yeah, yeah.
um, so, and I think it wouldn't necessarily be what every mix engineer would do anyway.
Oh no, it's
Yeah,
100% not what every
yeah,
mix
yeah,
engineer.
because that what they're looking to do is enhance the magic that is already there,
Right.
rather than necessarily create their own magic. Yeah, I believe that is what a mix engineer would do. I mean, I'm not one myself, as I've already said. Plus,
Yeah, I've
you're
worked with
not.
a few.
Yeah, go on.
Wait, go ahead. I've
No?
worked with like two. I've worked with one your guy and then this other guy, and like Klaus one, like, get it to where you like it and then send it to me. And then the other guy was like, take off everything unless there's something you're like really in love with, and let me just go with it. Um,
Yes.
and like, so what's there's I don't think there's a I'm
Again,
not saying like that's the right.
no,
Yeah.
exactly. There isn't a right way, but really, you as an artist, if you're doing your own mixing, you are the artist. I mean, you are the artist in terms of the mixing as well. And
Hmm.
I think turning yourself into a mix engineer that has to zero everything might be well, A, it's going to take a lot longer, and B, I think it's unnecessary. And did I get to C? I don't know. If I didn't, I'm sorry, C. D, you are probably going to get a worse result
Well,
because you're losing the magic that got you there in the first place.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's like sometimes I lose the magic, but sometimes it's like I've done some mixes and then compared, and it's like the doing it that way was like a 5x improvement. Like
Right.
everything clear, like just like whoa, like I can't even believe I made that. Like
Right. You know,
because
yeah, no, absolutely. The thing is that that doesn't mean so you could still get to that result without having to zero everything. I'm not sure that the zeroing everything is the thing that got you that result
right,
because I mean, there may be a situation. I mean, it's like you can still zero everything at some point when you realize that's what you need to do. But
I see.
again, it's this making it's almost like making this is how I do it decision. This is my work. These are the steps I always take. I zero everything. I start it in mono. I get 3 reference tracks. I do the levels, and then obviously it gets a bit more kind of. It depends, but you very clear compression, EQ, saturation, EQ, turn on stereo, panning, chorus effect. You know, and I know it's not as simple as that, right? But having that clear of a it's almost not. It's almost like a kind of step by step thing. Uh, may well mean that you're doing things that you don't need to do and won't always get you the better result. Because as I said, you can when you go, hang on, it just isn't working. I can't get this. Just isn't right. I'm going to try zeroing everything. You can do that at some point.
Hmm.
Yeah, that doesn't stop you from doing that when it needs to be done.
Right. So you're saying like earlier on in the writing process, go ahead and zero everything,
No, no, no,
or
no. I'm not. No, no. I'm not saying that at all. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying get the things into done as you have always done. Yeah, and then start your mixing process without zeroing everything to see to see if you can get there without.
I see.
Yeah. And then later on, if it's just not working, or you're thinking, oh no, I've gone too far, or this is just a mess, or it just sounds terrible, right? Well, then you've always got this sort of almost like the nuclear button, right? Well,
Right,
I'm just going to zero everything
right.
because I
Yeah.
think you may well be doing a lot of stuff that you don't need to do by
Yeah.
assuming that's what you always need to, by having created this model in your head. Now, having
Right.
said that, that it is, I think, of benefit to be clear about what the process is for mixing. So I'm not saying don't have a plan. Right? I'm just
Right.
questioning the granularity of your plan.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if we were to take, I'm just going to go back to the automatic music machine again. Yeah. I'm going to do something interesting. I've never kind of done this with anyone before, so this is a first. So if we
Okay.
take, so if we take the splurge, discover, draft, and done columns, now, yeah, and obviously essentially what the automatic music machine is it's a model for the creative process, any creative process. Yeah, whether
Right.
it's making a piece of music, writing a book, or mixing. Okay, so if we kind of take splurge, discover, draft, done, and release as the model of what you're doing in a mix. So we're now kind of going fractal. Yeah. So the whole of the creative process is described by this. Yeah. But if we now go fractal and just talk about the mixing process, what would you be doing in the mixing process if you were splurging?
Um, Probably not having a particular like just doing anything. Like okay, this could use a little more EQ it. This could use a little more reverb. Add some reverb. just kind of going without any sort of map at all.
Right. So essentially, the first stage of your mixing process is to like identify what the space is or the vibe is, or it's almost like you're doing things to kind of figure out what the thing of the mix is. Yeah. Now you may already be there by the time you've got into you're mixing. You may already know where you are, and really, I think splurge and discover are kind of the same things. You're discovering what it is. I mean, probably splurge, when we think about it, is the thing that is already existing when you start
Right.
mixing it. Yeah. So really, the first stage is really to discover how what is going to make this. Just going to make this bigger. What is going to make this mix better? Yeah. What's going to make this sound better? Yeah. So,
Right.
because you don't know yet. And I think this is the question that I had about the specific process where you zero everything, is that you're zeroing everything without having discovered whether you need to.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So let me go back to this. Where are we? So if in doing a mix, you are defining a space. I mean, in general, let's talk about your, I mean, which project are we talking about? Your solo project?
We could talk about the bells and ropes stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
So when it gets into to the mixing stage, is it a case of knowing what's needed? I mean, would you say that you already know what the vibe of the mix wants to be, what you're going to be doing with the mix?
yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, because typically when I'm writing, like I'm composing. It's if we can separate composing and mixing, like I'm composing with the idea of the mix in mind. So like I'm not writing two things in the same brief. It's like the Rubik's Cube thing. So like I'm writing things with the intention of them being mixed. Um, if that makes sense. Like so and the mixing is almost like the trying to just sweeten it.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
So in other words, what you're saying is you are making sure that there aren't 5,000 things in this frequency range. You're actually, and then there's contrasting things. So essentially, you're doing a lot of the mixing before you do the mix because you've chosen sound choice and things like that.
Yeah, and then when I found like I'm mixing like other people's things, it's like they don't write like that. They'll write just whatever they want without thinking about the mix, and it's like that's yeah, and then trying to mix those tracks is like um
Hard.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, think that a lot of the mixing is done before the mix. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's about sound choice. Yeah, but I mean, let's just say that you go into a mix and you kind of, you like how it sounds. Yeah, and there's some problems to sort out, some obvious problems to sort out. But in terms of kind of discovering what this mix is going to be, I mean, what would you be doing if you look at these different things here? In
You
fact,
know,
any of them, how would you be going about it? What would your first session be?
um just kind of turning things on and off and seeing how that impacts the vibe and the sound. Um, you know, scrolling through with EQs, hearing what it sounds like with a boosted high, with the reverb, like what does this sound like in a hall? Is it better in a room? Um,
Okay,
with the
so
delay, like
right, yeah,
what?
so like already, what are you noticing is the difference between what we're saying now and this?
You can kind of be doing instead of looking at it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you're looking at it like all on the same plane, and all could be happening at the
Yeah,
same time.
which can be very confusing. But where the upside, yeah, so that's a downside. Yes. So, but where the upside to this is that instead of your workflow, and I think this might be the problem I have with that word, right? Instead of your workflow telling you what to do, what is telling you what to do?
The music
Right.
and what's coming out.
Yeah. Now, as I said, we do have to make sure that we don't end up going down rabbit holes when we're doing this, because you could just go around in circles. Yeah, so we need to make some. So you said, just turning things off and off, and off and on, and trying things. So what is an overarching decision that you could make before you go into a mix, which will give you some kind of or maybe a decision or set of decisions that you could make before you go into a mix, which could help you define what you're actually going to try? Because you could just randomly try things, and for the next 100 years, and you wouldn't get anywhere.
Well, you could do like what you do in the machine, where you make a list of the things you're going to do in that session.
But how would you make that? So yeah, absolutely. So that would definitely be a step to take. Yeah. So I'm just going to go here. All right. And again, I think what we want to do here is you want to test this. Yeah. You want out of this coaching session, we're not going to come up with the answer. Yeah, we're discovering the answer by you trying things and then finding out. Yeah. Luke's first experiment. Yep. Again, the way I think about making music is that it is a way of defining how I'm going to make music. Yeah, finishing music is the best way to figure out how to finish music.
Right.
Yeah. So direct listen, which is a specific way of listening to music. Yeah. To track in done. Yeah. So what's the question? So that's the first step. Yeah. Let's call that step 0. So what's the first question that you could be asking yourself, which will help you decide what lists to make? What things to put on your list, what actions to take. Let's just call it actions to take in that first session.
Does anything sound like it's clashing?
Okay. Any other? Let's just brainstorm some questions. All right.
Are there any like holes or places where it sounds like there's too much of a certain frequency? What space is it occupying?
Hang on a minute. Let me just. I'm just. This isn't what you said, but do you know what I mean? It's like, is there anything like ouchy? Make your ears bleed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Where are the sounds meant to be in the front to back of the room, or like the volume?
All right. So anything else?
Could anything be bigger?
Okay. Any others?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure I could come up with 100 more.
Okay, cool. But all right. So looking at these, let's just stick with that for now. Yeah. Looking at these, there's a higher order. There's a higher order one, yeah, which actually comes before any of the others. Remember in the last coaching session where we were talking about the decisions you need to make first before any of the other decisions become relevant? You know,
Yeah.
there is a decision queue, an optimal build order, if you like, in terms of decisions.
I would say that where the sounds in the space is probably the
Is it? That's
what
definitely
space
one
does
of,
it occupy?
right. Isn't that? I mean, you can't know this one until you know that one.
Right.
Yeah. Because the thing is, yes, there may well be things that are clashing. There may well be holes. There may be unpleasant resonances, and there may well be things that could be bigger. Until you actually know what space you're creating, unless it's already been created. Yeah. Yeah. So it's what space is this occupying, or what space could this be occupying? Yeah. So sometimes it will already be occupying a space that you're into. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If not, then it's that. Yeah. Now, what I would suggest is we go back to the model of the creative process. How am I going to do this? Where you've got then actually now let's say that the splurge, the definition of the splurge is the thing that has got into done. Yeah, because you've already got a thing to work on, because that's really what a splurge is. Yeah, it's from blank canvas to something existing. When you've got something done, you've already got something existing. So in relation to this, what a splurge is the done track to be mixed. Yep. It's the rough mix, if you like. Let's call it the rough. Yep. In mixing engineer parlance. Okay, so that's what splurge is. Yeah. Discover would be if track is not already occupying a space or creating a space or a vibe that you're into. Yeah. Then you need to discover. That's the first thing you need to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If, however, because again, going through the creative process, if, however, your track does already occupy a space, then you're in draft because you know what it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because you're drafting a mix. Yeah, you're creating a first draft of a mix.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Because then, once you've identified what space this is occupying, that question, where are the sounds in this space? That's probably the next question. What's the best place for these sounds to be? What needs to be forward? What needs to be back? What needs to be over there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, because the thing is, by identifying that and changing that, then some of these might not be relevant anymore.
It might not matter.
I mean, you might have removed that simply by defining that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's just say step one is to ask, what space is this occupying? Yeah. I'm not sure how to define that exactly, but you just kind of want to ask yourself that question. You don't have to say, oh, it's occupying a, cardboard box, or, it's not like that. It's almost like you've got to think about it as a space. Yeah. So if there isn't, if it isn't one, if it isn't already doing that, what could it be? Yep. And then next to question 2, where are the sounds in this space? Or where do the, let's call it parts, want to be in this space? Yeah, some of them will already be there, some of them won't. Is this making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could even just say, right, okay, so that wants to be here, that wants to be there. So we're not even like addressing these problems yet.
Right.
Yeah. Now, we're missing something here. And it relates to the 4th dimension, which I alluded to before. What are we missing?
How those spaces move through time, or how those sounds move through the space in time.
Yeah. So, you know, really, at the moment, we've been talking about a moment. Yeah. Sorry, it's getting a bit late, isn't it? So,
Oh no, you're good.
Yeah,
You're good.
yeah.
I cut down on my caffeine, so I'm a little.
That's okay. Yeah, we were just talking about that before, weren't we? Yeah. So, where do the parts want to be? Yeah. So, where do the parts want to be in this space? Well, it's almost like a single moment in time, right? And what music is I mean, one of the things that music is it's a journey through time where there's this kind of tension and release, and we want to have, you know, contrast between sections, and we want things to go places, and you can do this a lot with the mix. Yeah. So while this is one of the things that we need to discover, yeah, thinking about it, the other thing that we need to discover, the other thing we need to know really is, where is this going?
Where's the space going, or where?
Well, it's not really where's the space going. It's almost like it's the, you know, I'm talking about, there are 2 things that we need to know and discover. There's the thing, and there's the payoff. This is very, very interesting. It's the first time I've realized this. So there's the thing and there's the payoff. The thing is, you know, what the track is about, the thing that people want to come back the most. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the payoff.
The hook.
Yeah. But it's not always the hook. Sometimes it's something else. But yeah, it's like, yeah, it's the, you know, in club music, it's often the groove, you know, the bass line with the groove, yeah, or something.
Yeah.
And the payoff is usually the moment at which that comes back in its most sort of form. Yeah. In pop music, often the payoff is the final chorus or something like that. Yeah. Well, this is really the mixing version of the thing. Yeah. And what we're talking about now, the 4th dimension, is really the mixing version of how do you get to the payoff.
How do you get to the
payoff?
Yeah,
it's about the payoff. So if the space is about the kind of x-axis, any particular moment in time, how the parts move through the piece of music in time, that's really about, you know, how do we create that, you know, the ultimate kind of payoff.
Right.
Yeah. It's like the x-axis versus the y-axis. So I can't think clearly right now of a good question for this, but it would be something like, let's just say, where is this going? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get what you're going for.
Yeah. I'm sure
I get
over time we will come up with a better question. Yeah. It doesn't sound right to me, but let's just go with that for now. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Because interestingly, over here in your previous process, I don't see any mention of automation.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that kind of happens along the way as well.
It
I guess
happens
I
a
didn't.
long way. Because you can do an enormous amount with, I mean, really, I was saying that compression, EQ, and saturation are kind of different versions of a very similar thing. So are levels.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah. I mean, because you can reduce the dynamics by using compression, but you can also just do that by automating it. Yeah,
Right.
and that's good because it won't change the sound.
Mm-hmm.
And in order
Right.
to,
Later.
yeah, I mean, in order to kind of create sort of tension and release, you can do an enormous amount of that simply with volume automation.
Yeah, no, I mean, volume automation can do a lot.
Yeah. So that I think that's something that we also want to be doing in Discover. So if you've already got a space, yeah, there,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you also want to be asking this question in the listening session. Is that I'm just going to go, I'm going to go with the question that we got right now. This is the other thing that we want to be kind of thinking clearly about in this mixing listening session. Yeah. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that what I'm going to get you to do, because this has been going on a long time, and it's late for you. It's early for me. It's late for you. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to do a discover session. So basically, what you're going to do is you are going to when I say discover session, I mean a mixing discover session. Yeah, not yeah. So you're going to listen to a piece of music that's in done. Yeah, and you're going to ask yourself these questions. Yeah, and then out of
Right.
that, you're going to make a list of things to do in your first mixing discover session. Yeah, mixing discovery session. Yeah, and that's what you're going to do in the session. You're simply going to define the space. Yeah, and then you're going to sort of figure out what to do in terms of levels, compression, EQ over the course of the track in that fourth dimension of time.
Cool.
Yeah, what you might need to automate, what you might need to put forward, whether you want the at some point some part suddenly to have a massive chorus put on it at some point, so that it suddenly goes from this to this. Yeah, I mean, you could even, thinking about this now, add an S to the end of that. Yeah, because you can go into different spaces in that fourth dimension.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So you're looking confused, Luke. Are you
No, I get it. So I'm gonna listen to I'm more intrigued than confused, and already kind of already making lists in my head.
right?
I'm literally like envisioning this song spaces in my head. Yeah, no, it'll be good.
Yeah. So I mean, if I give you an example, um, I'm writing a track at the moment. I'm finishing a track at the moment, and basically the space it is in is space.
Right.
It's like, and it's like it's called transfigured, and it's like this sort of, you know, that experience you have sometimes when you're meditating and you just, it's like there's nothing but everything at the
Yeah.
same time, and it sounds a bit like woo, but yeah, there's just like you're just and it's kind of describing that, if you like, the everythingness. And so it's kind of very, it's very space, and obviously, you know, you slap a massive reverb on and Bob's your uncle, right? But
Yeah.
it's not as simple as that, because in order to create the perception of space, you need things to be close. It can't, everything can't be far away, because if everything's far away, then it's just flat.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
You have to have things
if
like,
I look at the sky, and there are lights down here, and it's kind of reflecting, then it just looks flat. It just looks kind of flat, the sky at night. Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so you kind of need to have things close as well in
You
order
need
to make things far away.
the contrast.
Yeah, and so, you know, you don't have to define a space as clearly as, right, I'm thinking about, you know, space or anything like that, although you could. That's a way of doing it. I do that a lot. But you kind of really want to think about what is the space that this is in now, and where is it then, and you know, how could I contrast these things, because that will suggest certain things that you do and don't do in the mixing. And before any of this becomes relevant, that's really what you want to figure out. I mean, you know, I think, you know, when you look at mixing engineers doing mixing, they're talking, you know, they use the word vibe a lot and that, but I think that's really often what they're talking about. I'm sure it's not
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
only thing they're talking about. It's feel and things like that. But I think we do it, we are, when we're listening. The reason it's music is kind of on its own as an art form is that it, it's embodied. Yeah, we dance to music, and it puts us into a place or a space or a situation.
Yeah.
And the mix, that's what you're doing. You're putting somebody somewhere that isn't in front of a
You can do
DAW. Yeah.
you can do that with melodies too. I mean, you can do that with like, you know, like a melody can take you into the woods. Like if I play a piano on, or if I play like, I don't know, like the Harry Potter theme on piano, like it doesn't matter what the reverb is, you know, you're going to be in the castle. You know,
Yes. Yes.
um, yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah. So why don't you go and start doing this as your first, say, listen to the track, ask those kind of, they're very broad questions. I get that. Yeah. They're not like, how do I, what EQ do I put on this snare drum? It's like, it's as far removed from that as almost as possible to get. But the thing is, you don't know what EQ to put on a snare drum until you know what that snare drum is for. And what
yeah,
that
it's
snare drum is for is, yes, it's to do with the groove and everything else, but it's also in relation to the mix. It's almost like this, the space is a, and it can be a small space. I don't mean, it doesn't have to be big. It can be a small space. It's almost like the context is an overarching decision that will make other decisions much easier, and it will give you a framework for making the decisions. Because at the moment, your framework was this, yeah,
yeah,
which is just it's like a procedural framework, and this is, it's an artistic framework, if you like.
it's almost like it's like tactics versus strategy.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, maybe this would still work, but I think this is where the biggest breakthroughs for you are going to come at this point, in terms of actually identifying what your process is or wants to be.
Right. Right.
So has this been helpful?
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is great.
Um, is there anything that is unclear or that you want to ask?
Well, so after the Discover session, what do you think would happen after that? Or is this like,
Yeah. So after the discover session, I think it kind of depends. It will depend on what happens. If then you come back to it and you're like, okay, so I know what the space is, and I know where this is going. I know where this, how the, how the environment or the context is going to change through the tune, and I know where it's going to happen. Well, now you're into draft.
I see.
Yeah, and that's when you start asking, no, hang on, these questions.
The more like, where are the frequency issues? And
Yeah, that's not very clear, right? So the reason I pointed draft to that is because if you knew what that was, it would be in draft. The thing is, I doubt you would, because you're probably going to be mainly being discovered because you probably haven't, in most cases, identified that. Yeah. So these questions are when you start drafting.
oh, you're not sharing screen.
I'm not unsure. Oh, sorry. So I did have draft pointing to this. Yeah. Which basically meant that what I meant was that if you already knew that, that would be an indication that you would go into drafting mode. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really, in having this conversation, you need to have identified both of these things in order to be going into draft. So hang on. So well, what are the spaces I'm taking people through? That's still not the right question. But anyway, that's that. You know what we're driving at, yeah. So essentially, once you've identified these two questions, once you know what they are, then you're in the drafting phase, yeah. And that's when you ask these kind of questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because what we're doing by kind of taking this zoomed out approach first and going into a discover session, sort of defining those zoomed out elements is, well, why don't you tell me what are the upsides to doing that?
You'll probably avoid rabbit holes. You can have you won't just be like EQing for no reason. You'll be EQing with the intention of, you have an intention of where it's the space is. Like you have a goal you're looking at versus just EQing to like sound good, which could just, take you down an infinite number of loops.
Yeah, exactly. So so you're not doing things. You don't have to try everything because you've got a framework for what needs to be tried. Yeah, for what needs to be done. You know the purpose of, you have a why for why you're doing things.
That's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an artistic why. It's not a procedural why because some bloke on the internet said that this is how they do it. The music is telling me that this is what it wants to be, and that's what I'm going to do. So you're leading with the music. Yeah, you're letting the music tell you what needs to happen. Cool. So I think go and start using that. I'll go and start using it too because I'm getting much clearer on this. It's one of the great benefits of coaching people is that this is how you kind of get clear on how it all works, and then testing it out ourselves and then coming back to it. But essentially, what we're doing here, I mean, the automatic music machine, and at the moment, let's just go back to this. The automatic music machine is about the entire creative process. So what we are doing here, and what I'm doing with Luke here, and it goes splurge, discover, draft, done, and release, and the sketchbook is something separate. But essentially, as I said, it's a model for the creative process, and a model for the creative process means that it's fractal, in that you can apply it to every part of the creative process. So there's in the mixing process, there's a splurge, discover, draft, and done process, too. So essentially what I'm doing is applying the model to itself within itself, in order to gain clarity about what you need to do when, and what decisions you need to make first. Because by doing that, and this works for the entire creative process, which is why people can make eye-watering amounts of music and it still be way better than the music they were making before, is because they're not making certain decisions until they need to be made. And they're not even doing a lot of the things that they were doing before, because they don't need to, because they don't need to do it yet or at all. And we can apply this to any kind of sound design. We can apply it to mixing. We can apply it to anything. So actually, by learning how the creative process works in this model, helps you in every stage of the creative process. It kind of applies everywhere. I mean, one of my mentors said, you know that you've got a model right, and no model is perfect. If it was perfect, then it wouldn't be a model. It would be the actual thing, right? But no model is perfect. It's a map. It's not the territory. So no model is perfect, but you know that you're onto something when the model is fractal.
When it can go into the individual sections.
Yeah, it kind of applies within itself. So great. Well, thank you so much, Lee. This has been really a lot of fun for me. I love doing these kind of things. I hope you found it useful. I'm excited.
Oh no, it's great.
Yeah,
it's exciting.
Yeah, so I'm excited to go and try it myself with the album I'm finishing. I think I'm going to do that right now, in fact. So what we'll do is we'll finish this now. This has been a big one, but we'll finish this now, and maybe we'll do a catch up in a few weeks' time to see how it's been going.
Sounds great.
All right, nice one, Luke. Take care.
Thanks, Mike.
Cheers.